You'd be forgiven for not knowing. Perhaps we like to keep some things for ourselves, and why not? The trouble is, news travels, especially good news. Alberta grows some of the best malt barley in the world, and so no surprise, we make some pretty good beer too. So here's the secret. What started as a simple stretch of road in Edmonton, 99th Street, has become something much more. A vibrant destination for beer lovers from all walks of life. 30 years ago, no one could have predicted that this unassuming strip, in the shadow of a major brewery, would transform into Happy Beer Street, the heart of Edmonton's craft beer scene. A story of growth, community, and local craftsmanship. The journey of this neighborhood has unfolded slowly, yet in recent years, it's gained momentum and is the preferred destination for new or expanding microbreweries. With 10 craft breweries calling this street home, it's a testament to what happens when passion, hard work, creativity, and Alberta's finest brewers come together. Welcome to the birthplace of Edmonton's craft beer revolution. Welcome to Happy Beer Street.
If we take a longer view of craft beer in Edmonton, the story is more about failure than it is success. Success is a more recent arrival to the beer scene in this city. In the mid 1980s, where we started to see Big Rock and Granville Island and some of the pioneers of the Canadian craft beer scene get up and running, there were efforts in Edmonton to try and open small craft breweries here in town. Strathcona Brewing, which then turned into Flanagan's and Sons. There was a brew pub downtown, there was a brew pub out in the West End, there was a brew pub on the South Side. All of them failed. They didn't last more than a couple of years, right? And so that was a hard time to open a brewery. People didn't really understand craft beer, and so these were really, really brave pioneers trying to blaze a trail without success. I think the first brewery in Edmonton to actually find a way to make a go of it was Alley Kat, and Neil Herbst and his partners. Laid off from got a package from the provincial government, turned that package into the startup money he needed to do this brewery, and I think he did it the right way. And so he was the first. He was the he was the first that kind of could actually make it work. Brewster's had a brewery in the Oliver Square district up until a few years ago. But that was a Calgary operation opening a new brewery in Edmonton, right? So Alley Kat really, I think, is the godfather of Edmonton brewing, and they did it with a very specific business model. And it was a business model that came to be what marked the 1990s and the early 2000s in terms of how do you want your brewery to succeed. And you have 3 or 4 core beer, a light lagery type thing, a dark brown ale kind of thing, right? Something kind of hoppy. And then, and this one's particularly important, something fruity, right? And so Apricot quickly took off for Alley Kat, helped them keep the lights on in the lean years. So what was interesting with their model is the bulk of their sales are always around, continue to be around their fruit beer, whether it be the main squeeze or the Apricot or the other ones that they're doing now. That always kept the lights on. But then what they did is they used that flow, that cash flow, to try and then produce award-winning, world-renowned, like basically as good as any beer you could get in the world would be. Full Moon Pale Ale was a classic American pale ale until they ended it last year. Their Old Deuteronomy barley wine, again seen as one of the best barley wines in the country. So they leveraged the sales from the fruit beer that were popular and people wanted to buy, and they used it to try and make seasonals and some other core product that were of renowned quality that craft beer people, that beer geeks, flocked to, right? And that was the way that so they were able to both build a reputation while keeping the lights on. And you had to do that in the 90s. You couldn't just do a rotating series of IPAs back then. Your business wouldn't survive. So I think they really helped show in the early years what it takes to open a successful brewery. And they basically were kind of alone, right? I mean, again, there was some others that came and went. There was Amber's Brewing, which kind of lasted for a couple of years and collapsed. Yellowhead made a good go of it for a while. I think they opened in 2010, I believe. COVID kind of did them in, as well as some other business sort of issues. And it's only been in the last few years where I think Edmontonians have been open to a broader range of beer styles and a broader range of beer experiences, right? Alley Kat didn't have a tap room until a few years ago, right? They sold their product in bars and pubs and in liquor stores, and that was the model, right? The model, I think, has shifted, right? Now it's much more about creating, at least until COVID, the model very much became taproom experience, right? What am I experiencing? I walk into your brewery. What am I experiencing? What am I seeing? What am I hearing? What's the ambiance, right? And then you sample the beer, and you try the beer, and you're tasting it in place. And that really, I think, anchors that sense of local feel, because you're doing it where the beer is actually being brewed. And I think that's where the business model kind of really started to settle in Edmonton. Is creating these breweries that obviously still package their product and sold it in liquor stores, but we're really trying to build an experience for their consumers right out of the brewery.
Initially, there were three of us that were looking at doing that. One of them dropped out, and a fellow by the name of Richard Cholin and I went ahead with the project. So I guess it was about June of 1994, I resigned from the province. They gave me some cash to leave, and I put that into the brewery. Richard put some money into the brewery, and we started off on this big adventure to create Alley Kat. So we ordered equipment from a company in Victoria, or I guess Saanich, called Specific Mechanical, which I think has built tons of breweries around. Ordered our equipment and found a spot. Again, because we weren't allowed to have a tap room or anything, we looked for somewhere that was inexpensive, but still sort of central in the city. So we looked at a bunch of different locations, looked up in the Yellowhead, looked along Calgary Trail, and ended up just off 99th Street. We found a good spot there, so still close to White Avenue in downtown. So we set up there. I think our lease started in, August, I believe, of 94. Equipment started arriving in about September. We had to do some renovations to the building. And by December, we had equipment in place and we're starting to brew. Did a few test brews. I think we had a little bit of beer out by the end of December, but really didn't start selling beer until January. And it was tough. So I guess what we hadn't counted on is maybe it was hubris, but we had assumed that if we brew it, they will drink it and purchase it, but not so much. We started off with an amber ale and a wheat beer, an unfiltered wheat beer, which I think were quite good beers. But the unfiltered part of the wheat beer caused us a lot of trouble, because people would get it and return it because it was cloudy. Everything that was around then was filtered. And I think we were the first folks in with an unfiltered beer. There were probably a few, trying to think, maybe commercially, a few Belgian beers that were unfiltered, but really people just weren't used to that. So we ran into trouble with that early on. That was an experience, I guess. So early on we dropped that beer, probably after might have kept that beer around for 6 months maybe. And then we brewed an apricot ale That was our first seasonal beer, and it took off like wildfire. So that was, I think, what we probably became known as, or known for, was that apricot beer, which was oddly named Kat.
We started Sea Change back in 2017 with Ian McIntosh, which is the guy who kind of put the idea together, wanting to start a brewery. Me and Ian, we've been friends for quite a while before that, and we worked in a bunch of different ways together, but mainly we were musicians that played together in different bands, but we did shows together. I worked on a lot of his album covers and posters and merchandise artwork, and we kind of created quite a bond starting off. So when he decided he wanted to get into the brewing world, he kind of assembled a team of like-minded thinkers to build this whole brewery together with. And it was the summer of 2017, and I just got married and about to go on my honeymoon, and he kind of popped the second biggest question of my life, which is, you want to start a brewery with me? And I said yes to that. So once I got back from my honeymoon, we kind of got working on the brand and the brewing, and basically we've been an owner-operated brewery since the beginning. So I'm involved in all the creative, the marketing, all the art that goes along with it. Ian and Jay Sparrow, they did a lot of the sort of business side and the hospitality production of everything. And then Taylor Fall came in as our head brewer and partner as well. And we all sort of created this tap room here all together. We put up the drywall ourselves, we ground the floors, we did all the groundwork to get the pipes in and all the brewery equipment in, did all the artwork, and we started brewing just one single beer. It was a simple blonde ale. There was not much to it, didn't really have a name, didn't really have a brand. And we kind of launched that just in keg format for bars and restaurants. We knew a lot of the people working in the hospitality industry, so it was easy to get our foot in the door with a couple spots that we really enjoyed. And while we were doing that, we were working hard on opening this tap room. This location, I'd like to think that it was a great plan to kind of build this whole section of Edmonton up to being a brewery district. But when we got this location, really it was the only place we could get. And Ian kind of went ahead, and I believe he put a lease on it and signed all the paperwork before he even put the company together. So we were kind of locked in. Originally, I believe it was a bakery, and then it was kind of just sitting empty for the past while. So when we took over, it was just an empty slate, had a lot of junk in here, and we just kind of moved it out. As far as zoning goes, I believe it was already set to be a food production space. So it wasn't too hard to get things rolling here. The biggest thing was converting just an empty warehouse industrial into a place that did have all the proper drainage and setups to put a brewery in here.
The Monolith is a brewery dedicated entirely to fermentation in barrel, via mixed fermentation when we actually put our microbes in, or spontaneous fermentation where we use the air of the neighborhood around us to ferment our beer. We add nothing to it, and it turns into delightful beer. This brewery has been operating just over 6 years, and it's been funny because we haven't been open for that long in terms of the public. The tap room has only been open a year and a half, because it takes so long to make the beer here. The minimum we'll usually keep beer in barrel before we package is about a year and a half, and beer can stay in for up to 4 years. So we've got beers that have been fermenting, for 4 years, 3 years. We've actually just recently did a spontaneous blend with all 4-year-old barrels, and the longer it gets in barrel, the more complex, the more savory it becomes. We have a little less fruit character. So the vision of the Monolith was to do these really, really unique beers here in Edmonton at a production scale. This is also something that's very seldom done anywhere, and in Canada itself there's only a few breweries that do this, so we're among a unique bunch. And I think I would say with 500 puncheons, those are 500 liter barrels, we're probably among the largest barrel programs in Canada as well.
Benstick Brewing, we started back in 2015 was the first beers we sold at stores. And so we've been around for 7 years or so at this point. We started in a little industrial bay up on Fort Road. We just had this teeny tiny little brewery that brewed about 400 liters at a time. So that's like 8 kegs. We were referred to as a nano brewery, so we were even smaller than a micro brewery. And since then, we've moved to this bigger space here just south of White Avenue in Edmonton, and we love it here. We've got this nice big tap room now. At our old space, we were all brewers. We just wanted to make beer and send it to liquor stores to sell and work Monday to Friday. But being brewers and not business people, we were quick to find out that a tap room is an important part of the old business plan. So we only had 4 bar stools way up there on the north end, and so moving here and having room for people to drink beers and bring their dogs and play shuffleboard, eat cheesies at the bar. We're really loving it here now.
So I think one of the key factors in Edmonton finally starting to catch up a little bit in terms of our brewery, our beer scene, has been some late but appreciated changes to bylaws. Edmonton was for decades notoriously difficult to open a brewery in, right? Zoning bylaws and other sort of layers of rules just made it a headache. It still is a bit of a headache, especially compared to other smaller centers who kind of like they're so excited to have you, they'll do anything, to help make it happen. Edmonton's never really approached it that way. Up until a few years ago, Edmonton city councils were kind of suspicious about breweries. They sort of saw them as somehow, sordid kind of operations. And so they basically forced them into light industrial zones, right? Breweries often open in light industrial zones for their own reasons. The rent is cheap. And so especially if you're not trying to draw customers to your brewery, you can open up in a light industrial area for a lot cheaper than if you're opening up on White Ave, right? But if you want to actually attract people and create street traffic and create some kind of local community buzz, being in a light industrial area, that's not going to work, right? And so when the city finally realized that breweries aren't a traditional light industrial business and that they are actually quite compatible with other commercial businesses, that was a really important, pivot. When the city finally went, you can build a brewery wherever you want, basically. That I think was really important because then it suddenly opened up the range of breweries you could create. You could create a brew pub in a busy street area, right? You could create a funky little brewery kind of in a commercial district that people kind of want to get traffic to, right? And so that was a really huge piece. Combined with some key policy changes made by the province that also smoothed opening up breweries in Alberta. The first one was eliminating the production capacity requirement. I won't get into the details, but that was such a dumb rule, and it existed for decades because it just meant you couldn't open a small brewery. You had to open a mid-sized brewery, and that's expensive. So it really, really held back the industry. So that got removed in the early 2010s. And then controversial they definitely were, but the markup rules by the Notley government between 2015 and 2019, very controversial. If you look back at it now though, they worked, right? It really helped create the space that the industry needed to be able to establish a strong base in the market. And then once that base happens, you didn't need the protections anymore, and they've now been removed, and everybody's surviving. So I think it just shows that policy actually impacts business in very direct ways, something I've always believed.
So with Alley Kat, it was a little bit of a leap of faith. We just wanted, we were still in the phase of, and I guess Alley Kat was always a brewery that tended to experiment a little more and we tended to brew beers that we liked, thought that other people would like, obviously, but so Alley Kat came around because when we'd been working on the brewery and we had done a tour of our suppliers, so we'd gone out again. Most of our suppliers were west, so we went out west And we ended up coming across from, I guess, Idaho into BC. And there was a little brewery along the border that had an apricot flavored wheat beer. And we loved it. We said, oh, well, you know, someday we gotta try something like that. So when we decided to do a summer seasonal in '95, we, you know, did a bunch of test batches, and we thought we should, you know, we really should try to do this apricot thing because we really loved it. And after lots of trial and error, came up with what we thought was a pretty good recipe and put it out there, and consumers really enjoyed it. And again, it was a little bit, at the time, considered a little bit out there because people would say, "What, you know, who puts fruit in beer?" We said, well, the Belgians have done it for a long time, but given that there were very, very few Belgian beers available, the general population didn't know about it. But for whatever reason, the beer took off. People loved it and accepted the fact that there was fruit in it. For a little while, we actually described it as a, trying to think now, I think we called it a beer cooler or something along that line, just in the script on the bottle, just to try to explain what it was. But abandoned that. I think there were some regulatory concerns about calling it that. So at any rate, it became one of the beers that we were well known for. The other beer that we designed was a pale ale called Full Moon, which was one of the first, I think, pale ales that was available in the province. I think Big Rock had made one. But this was a little on the hoppier side. It was using North American hops, so it tended to be more citrusy. And that beer was originally brewed as a contract beer for a brew pub that had started up called Taps, which was between Calgary Trail and Gateway. And when they finally got their equipment up and going, they dropped that beer, so we kept it and turned it in and started selling it ourselves as Full Moon. So anyway, that's the first year.
So we picked this location when we moved in. The Monolith, the Blind Enthusiasm's mixed ferment project, was across the street already. So we definitely went and asked their blessing to see if we could move in across the street here, and we knew that the types of beer they were making and what we're doing are complement each other but are totally different, and we thought it would be a fun way to join the neighborhood. And then since then, Sea Change has moved a production facility in next door. Ale Architect and Odd Company are a couple blocks away. Longleaf is just a block away from that. So there's been a lot of more breweries being added since we've moved in, and it's awesome. It makes for, you know, a Saturday if you want to go grab an Uber somewhere and try out a bunch of beers. You might as well come down to Happy Beer Street here. So yeah, that's really great.
When we started, we figured that we'd have kind of a nice little tap room, and at the time we still thought about it as a tasting room. We were probably I want to say we were about the 6th brewery that ever opened up in Edmonton, so we were quite fresh, and this was just fresh out of the rule changes with a little bit of time. So there wasn't really a precedent for super successful tap rooms or massive numbers in craft brewing, so we kind of started with whatever we knew from other provinces and other cities that we visited. But we thought, you know, a modest little tap room would do. Once we opened up, I think it was August of 2018, we opened up our tap room, and it was just a massive success. We had a lot of time to build up our brand and figure out how we want to present ourselves over the past year. And quite honestly, all we did was do things that we thought we would enjoy in a tap room, in a room, in a brand, and in a beer. and we kind of just went with our gut. And when we launched, it was a crazy success. So we went from this small team of owner operators into quite a massive team over the past 6 years. Learning as much as we could, filling all the voids that we weren't very good at, and creating sort of this, semi-big, small company.
We started up the brewery here in Edmonton because it's our hometown, born and raised. My dad grew up here, we grew up here, so we figured what a better place than the city we grew up in and love. We chose this location here because we kind of, we looked all over the place, and the city had some weird zoning rules, and this was one of the only strips in this kind of area that you could actually set up a brewery. So this is kind of where we started, and shortly after we signed the lease here, we noticed that there's 2 other breweries that are opening up in this area, and the next thing you know, there's like this whole Happy Beer Street thing going on.
So another thing that's very important with the model for us is we use actually a lot of scientific method and analysis in making beer. We use traditional methods, but we've refined those. My head brewer, Doug Cheknita, he worked at Cantillon in Belgium and learned a lot of the traditional Belgian methods, brought them home back to Canada. And we've been, since he's been back, we've been actually using those methods, but also refining them using a lot of analysis and scientific method. We actually have been working on a large research study with the U of A, where we're actually determining the contents of these spontaneous barrels. So the gist of what you're tasting is driven not just by the art of brewing, but also the science of brewing. Here in the tap room, we offer usually multiple bottle pours of a variety of our beers. We have a board of 4 drafts, 1 cask, traditional British hand-pulled cask. That's typically only on special weekends, and also up to 6 bottles for bottle pours. This gives people an opportunity to try a huge range of what we do. And from going forward, we'll always have spontaneous beer by the glass, which is going to be, again, a rarity within Canada. You don't see this almost anywhere. The beers are also very unique. They're very fruit forward, very complex. They live in a world almost between natural wine, beer, and cider.
The volumes that we produced at the start were tiny. I'm trying to think here. The first year, maybe we did, if we did 900 hectoliters, 600 hectoliters, something like that. It was pretty small. And it was a tough go. I mean, we weren't making any money. In fact, we were bleeding cash. So the first couple of years were very tough. And after, I guess, year 2, my business partner decided that he wanted out. So my wife, LeBon, bought his share, and then we turned it into a family business, which I think made it a little easier in many ways, although my children disliked it because we had business meetings at every dinner table, although they certainly understood the business. At any rate, so Levon was working in corporate Alberta, and it was about, I guess, year 3 that she actually quit her job and joined the brewery full time. And it took a while. I mean, it was a tough business, and there weren't very many microbreweries around, or brew pubs. I mean, here in Edmonton, prior to us starting, there had been a brewery called Boccalino on Jasper Avenue. It was an Italian restaurant with a brew pub attached. There had been, I'm trying to think now, what are the other breweries? There was Flanagan and Sons, which had taken over another brewery, or bought out a brewery that had gone under. So there weren't, and I guess Brewster's had just built a brewery in Edmonton. So there wasn't a lot of us around, and the regulation in the province for breweries was tough. So we realized early on that we needed to do some lobbying, and thank goodness, I guess I had a background in government, so I understood regulation, understood how government worked. And a few of us got together and decided to form an association and lobby for some tax relief. I think we were paying, we paid the same rate as the large breweries at the time, which was, I believe, 98 cents a liter. So given that a 6-pack of beer, I think was selling for about probably $6 at the time, $7. $2 of that was going to the province. So it was tough. There wasn't much margin there. So we started lobbying the province to adjust the tax rate, or as they called it, the markup rate. And it took a while, but eventually we convinced them to roll it back a little bit. It still wasn't tiered. It was just, I guess tiered in the way that there were 2 tiers, as I recall. So the sort of commercial rate and then the small brewery rate. So yeah, those first years were pretty tough, and I'd say it probably took us about 5 or 6 years before things sort of settled down. But by that time, there were other breweries that were opening across the province. Still not much in the way of other breweries in Edmonton. Edmonton was sort of slower to develop breweries than Calgary, or, well, primarily Calgary. There were a handful of breweries there. And I'm trying to think who opened up in Edmonton after us. We were by ourselves for a long time.
One of the things that's really interesting is how now that breweries can basically be anywhere in the city, they've organically clustered themselves in districts, right? So we have Happy Beer Street on 99th Street, which has 8 or 9 breweries now. We've got the Hot Pocket starting to form in the Oliver 124th Street area. Like, that's all very natural and very organic. It's really fascinating how that plays out. But I think it's a combination of 2 things. It's a combination of those are districts that the target audience is readily available, right? So, middle-class neighborhoods of a particular demographic who are more likely to be interested in craft beer, an urban kind of crowd. To say maybe a bit, tilting sort of younger to middle-aged, right? They like to be able to kind of walk and cycle around their neighborhoods, and they appreciate that kind of existence. They don't get in their car and drive 20 minutes to get to the movie theater or whatever. And so that allows a sort of space where you can actually create little pockets, little zones where people could literally go to 2, 3, 4 breweries in an afternoon and have a different experience at every single one of them. And so what's interesting about Happy Beer Street, I think in particular, but even the Hot Pocket starting to evolve in that direction, is how it naturally is creating diversity of beer styles, beer approaches, and branding, right? Is that you have very different breweries along Happy Beer Street. If you work from north to south, you're not just going from youngest to oldest, because Alley Kat's at the south end and they're the oldest, but you're getting such a diversity of experiences, right? Whether it be Bent Stick and then the Monolith, which I talked about, but then you look at Ale Architect's kind of feel and approach to beer. It's so different than Omen, who focuses on dark beer, right? And then there's Odd Company, which has kind of its own interesting kind of quirky 1970s vibe, right? And so you can get different experiences all within a few blocks. That's a boon for the consumer. Like, as a customer, that's just fun. You spend a Saturday afternoon, you hit 4 breweries, get a taster flight at each one. And if you happen to be in the area, you can walk home. So I think these areas are really important in terms of building a sense that there actually is a beer community out there, that there is a beer, it's a thing, right? That you can do. It's not just, oh yeah, we got some breweries and I'll buy some beer on my way home from work. For the weekend, I'll go stop by my liquor store, get some local beer. But actually realizing that they're happenings. It's like, oh, I won't just pick up a 4-pack on my way home. It's like, oh, maybe I'll spend, part of my Saturday visiting some places, visiting some friends, and then also seeing all these breweries.
Okay, so Happy Beer Street. Yeah, it's a collaboration between all the breweries, the small craft breweries along the 99th Street corridor in Edmonton here, in the Ritchie neighborhood. Most of the breweries are on the west side, or West Ritchie. And there's 8 of us right now. There's more coming. There's definitely a lot of rumors of more coming. And we all work together. We throw these parties once a month. We have food trucks, and we have live music and casks, but we also collaborate on beers. We brew beer together, collaborative brew, at least once or twice a year. We meet up, we hang out, and it's a really, really tight community. All the breweries are within walking distance, or cycling distance, or scooting distance if you're on scooters. And it's a really fun way to spend an afternoon, to come and hop along all the breweries. Each brewery is very different than the others. Each one has its own atmosphere, its own style of beer they brew, and their own experiences. So you can hop along to all these different breweries along the street in one day and have 8 separate experiences, or more if there's more breweries.
Three of us brewed together in a garage for close to a decade together, and after a while realized that this was kind of the creative outlet we were really looking for beyond our regular daily jobs. So put together a plan to slowly build the capital and the plan to get Long Roof going. We moved into the Ritchie neighborhood. We were looking all over the city then, and we all live currently in Edmonton. So that was the obvious choice for where we were going to open the brewery. But I used to have a house in the Ritchie neighborhood, and the vibe of the neighborhood between Ritchie and Hazelbean really fit with our outlook and desire for what we want the brewery to be. More of a communal meeting spot, family friendly, and just love the community. So this worked wonderfully for us to move into this neighborhood, and ultimately everything worked out great as more and more breweries seem to be moving into this 99th Street corridor, and we've slowly created this Happy Beer Street. I say slowly, but ultimately it's been really a 2.5-year process that this has just been building at an exponential rate, and it's absolutely wonderful. The community in the city, the brewing community in the city is absolutely amazing. I've yet to have any issues with any other breweries or brewers. We all seem to be working towards the common goal of just promoting great craft beer.
Initially, our brewing space was quite small, and we never really thought we'd grow into it as fast as we did. So we had this little tiny system, and at the time we weren't really doing any canning either. We kind of stuck to doing kegs, and that's what we were good at. So even our first and second beer, it was a blonde ale and an Irish red ale. They were all sort of brand specific. There was no name, there was nothing to it, and we thought we'd keep a very simple offering to kind of just be that house beer for a lot of spaces. Since then, we've developed a ton of different brands that we've tied to the community. We tied to things that we felt really strong about, and made some interesting beers that really blew up. And what went from probably a 4,000 square foot production space ended up being about 18,000 square feet in our new larger production facility just down the road. And going from maybe it was probably 2 brewers and a packaging guy to now well over 15 people working just in the back. So that was a huge change for us. As far as beers go, we learned a lot from being in a band and sort of hustling to promote your music. And we always knew that you could be the greatest musician and have the greatest song ever written, but if no one hears about it, it doesn't really mean much. So we were huge sticklers on trying to figure out something more interesting than just being a blonde ale or an Irish red ale. Building a strong brand and building more iconic imagery. So once we kind of got over that initial sort of launch, we decided to focus on really making the iconic beers that we're known for today. One of my favorites being the Wolf, and I remember that was a huge breakthrough when we were experimenting with it's a hazy pale ale, and we hit the recipe and it just felt right. So we gave it sort of this, at the time, an ominous name, the Wolf. It had really no meaning at the time. We just thought it would be something that we find would be an interesting thing that we would love to drink. And we put it in sort of this matte black label with a gold wolf on it. And it's become iconic in a lot of ways for our brand. And once the liquid, like the beer was fantastic, the label worked out really well. And we just kind of launched with that. Everything sort of followed that same formula. As far as branding goes, my focus as an artist designer is to kind of do the things that make me most excited. I feel like that's the best way to genuinely put forward anything that you're building. And for us, we were ingrained in this sort of punk rock world, traditional tattoos and things like that. And it always focused around having a really strong central image. It's the thing that made merchandise really sell for us when we were bands, and album covers, and we're thinking about all these little variations of our product. So we kind of went with that. We went with the band model and how to promote ourselves. We did a lot of branding exercises that were mostly grassroots marketing. So we've never really paid for a bunch of ads. We never really did those things, but we did a lot of fun stunts and found interesting ways to get people interested in our product.
The facility itself, the Monolith, was purpose-built to make beer in barrel. And as you can see when you go on a little tour of it, we do offer tours here. It's a unique, absolutely unique brewing tour, because you see a lot of what's actually more common in wine or champagne making than you do in beer. We have 4 barrel rooms, each chock full of barrels, 2 spontaneous, 2 mixed ferment. The brew house is custom designed and built based on traditional Belgian designs, and actually with permission measured and recreated here. We just have a real passion for this kind of beer. That developed in me. When I was in Austin, Texas, I saw Jester King in its early stages and saw them develop. And they're, of course, one of the most noteworthy spontaneous beer makers in the US. And I had the opportunity to go there in the first year multiple times when I was working on our Star Wars game. So I saw kind of how that worked, became very passionate about this kind of beer, came home to Edmonton here on Happy Beer Street to recreate it.
We always had I thought, a really good dynamic at Alley Kat. I think people thought it was, I hope they thought it was fun to work there. I mean, I'm sure there are a few that didn't enjoy it, but over the years there were quite a number of people that came through that worked for us and ended up either with their own breweries or in the industry. And in part, I suppose that's because there weren't a lot of other breweries around to work in. But yeah, we trained lots of folks. And there was at the time, there was no place to go to learn to brew. So it was very much, you go work somewhere and learn by doing. So it's almost like an apprenticeship.
Yeah, so the reason why we came to the Hackey Beer Street area, like we wanted to obviously have a bigger production space, but we still wanted to be a very taproom focused brewery also. And if you were in Edmonton and you kind of want light industrial that is near residential, this is probably, that's centrally located. This is your best option, this kind of Ritchie area. We also didn't want to be anywhere close to our downtown location. We want to be on the south side of the river to be kind of just a different area than that. So this was kind of really our only option, and we just were looking for spaces, and this one came up. We're also looking to buy a building. That was also a big kind of a big priority for us. So this building came available, and it was a bank sale, so it was again a very long process. I think it was about probably an 8-month process just to buy the building before that. So it's been a while putting this space together.
That was so when we decided to do a brewery, obviously we needed a name and a logo, and we tried a bunch of different names, brewery names with friends. So I think River City Brewing was one that we talked about. Another one was North Saskatchewan Brewing. Oddly, people said, "Oh my God, you can use water from the river?" It's like, so yeah, well, what do you think comes out of your tap? At any rate, but we wanted something that was just a little bit different, because we were planning to brew beers that were not your standard, at the time, lager. And for whatever reason, came up with Alley Kat. There was no... My first partner, Richard, lived in South Edmonton, and for whatever reason, there were a lot of feral cats around where he lived. So I suspect that to him that meant something. But yeah, we wanted a name that was just was different, wasn't necessarily, didn't sound too corporate, and came up with Alley Kat. And when we tried it with our friends and neighbors and stuff, they liked it.
So our old brewery was a 3.5 barrel brew house. This is a 15 barrel brew house, so it's a pretty significant upgrade. Our old tanks were half the size of these smaller tanks, and so now our small tanks are twice as big as our old ones. But this is still a pretty small system in the scheme of things. Like, you could see this in a brew pub. It's not a very big brewery. I'm sure you'll see other bigger breweries on the tour. And so this one it's a 3-vessel brew house. So that means we mash the grain, or yeah, I'll take you through the brewing process really quick, I guess. So when you ferment beer, yeast eats sugar and makes alcohol and CO2 is a very basic formula. But so first, the sugar in beer comes from grain, malted barley. Sugar in wine, you get that from grape juice. For mead, it's honey. For cider, it's apple juice. In beer, it's barley. And so the farmers grow the barley. I grew up on a farm near Wetaskiwin, and we ship barley from there to Hogarth Malting, and they malt it for us. And malting means they wet the seed and then they let it sprout. And then once the seed sprouts, it's kind of mobilizing those starches into fermentable sugars. And then you put the seed in an oven and you kill that poor little baby sprout. And so once it's kilned, then it's ready to be used in brewing. And so we mill the grain, so we just crack it open so we can access the sugars inside. The grain goes into the mash tun, where this is sort of the extra step where in wine or cider, yeast ferments, you just add the yeast directly and it ferments the sugar. In brewing, we have to mash first. So we put the the barley at about 65 degrees Celsius, depending on the beer recipe. And there's an enzyme that breaks down the sugar chains into shorter chains that yeast can eat. And that's about the scienciest part. Then we move the mash over to, this is a lauter tun. A lot of breweries will have 2 vessels, and so you'll rinse the grains in the mash tun. But this one, we can move the mash into the lauter tun, rinse that tasty wort, it's called, out of the grain. And then we can start a second mash if we're brewing a lot of beer in a day. So we rinse the grain over here in the lauter tun, then it goes over into the kettle, and then the kettle is where we boil it with hops. So we boil beers for at least 90 minutes to get rid of off flavors, and then you add hops at different times depending on if you want bitterness or more so flavor and aroma. You just add the hops during different times in the boil depending on the recipe, and then you cool it in to sort of room temperature so that you're not cooking the yeast. And then you add the yeast, and the yeast eats the sugar and makes tasty beer. And so yesterday I brewed a batch of Porch Swing. It's a beer that uses peach dragon fruit rooibos tea from a local tea maker called the Tea Grow. And that one, I guess it's actually over in this tank here. And so you can see that that yeast is busy eating sugars, and one of the byproducts is the CO2 bubbling in the bucket here. And so yeah, that's a beer that was brewed yesterday. Today Quinn is brewing a batch of Amber Wave Amber Ale. And yeah, that's sort of the brew house. These are the bright tanks where once the beer's done fermenting, we leave the yeast and maybe hops if we dry hop the beer in the cone there, and we pump the beer off into these packaging tanks. And this is where the beer is carbonated and it sort of clarifies, and this is where we can or keg from. And then this is our little canning line that someone stands on one end and feeds empty cans on all day, and then someone on this end pulls the full ones off, and we weigh them to make sure there's the right amount of beer in them. And it's a little bit tedious, but it works for us so far. And then we're actually still, the pinch point is we're still labeling cans by hand. So this is another laborious task, but this is a can of, we brewed a collaboration with Long Roof just down the street. And this was a strawberry rhubarb kettle sour that we got some rhubarb from people in the neighborhood and brewed this beer together. This is a fun label. It really buzzes, kind of almost gives you a headache when you're staring at it all day. But we're excited to release that in the next couple weeks. But yeah, we spend a lot of time sitting here hand labeling cans.
So Alley Kat is Edmonton's original craft brewery and oldest craft brewery. So we are the 4th oldest in the province of Alberta. Started in 1995. So originally founded by Neil Herbst. He and his wife were the owners up until February of 2020 when myself came in and took over Alley Kat. Neil stayed on to help with transition for a while and to keep the tradition of Alley Kat going. Since then, we've continued to brew many of the same beers, but have also introduced new twists on Alley Kat. We are a very fun and approachable brewery and like to try to appeal to a very wide crowd, in which we've done with, we specialize in fruit beers, but we also have a lot of other beers as well that we offer. Alley Kat's always been located here at our 99th Street location in Edmonton. We operate a tap room and brew everything in-house here as well. Back then, there wasn't a whole lot of competition when it started in '95. It's continued to grow, and we've seen Happy Beer Street, which is 99th Street here, push forward, and there are now, I believe, 7 breweries here with more to come, so it's kind of an exciting time. We like to get together and host different events throughout the year and different collaborations as well. overall, the craft beer scene here in Edmonton and in Alberta is something that's continuing to grow. We've seen a great example of that this year with Alley Kat's work with the Edmonton Riverhawks. So being one of the first major sporting stadiums to be exclusively craft beer, which was a huge announcement this year that we made. And we're going to be continuing that going forward. So Alley Kat was the main beer there. And we brought in a few other breweries throughout Edmonton that we collaborated with and had different beers on location at all the games as well this year. Craft beer in general, just an exciting time. We offer so many different types of beer, different styles of beer, just different iterations that we all put together and we think about, and people are really liking that local feel, that local ingredients that we use, the local products that we produce, and that's really what's driving people, and we're seeing that growth in the market here in Edmonton.
Start over here. This is the brew house. And the brew house is where we, take the grain, add the water, turn it into wort, which is then fermented into beer. Ours is very unique, this brew house. So for example, you're not going to see an item like this. This is called a Grant. This brew house is modeled after traditional Belgian breweries. We've actually got permission when Doug was working in Belgium. He got permission to measure and recreate a couple of the turn of the century Belgian breweries. This is actually a modern incarnation. It's made by Specific Mechanical in Victoria. These controls are used to control the flow of the wort out of the mash tun and then into the kettle. So these all control different quadrants, and so you can actually control how the water comes in and out, and also the wort. That's a decoction kettle or a secondary kettle for the liquid that comes out of the brewing process. We actually heat it up and denature the enzymes before we're into the final kettle here. And this final kettle is where we actually do our boil. It's a 3.5-hour boil. A very unique and traditional approach. We use aged hops, so very different from your normal brewery. Typical brewing process 60 to 90 minutes, but in Belgium, 3 to 4 hours is common. So it comes out of there and goes into this, currently not fully put together, but this is called a hop back, where out of this tank where the hops are, it actually effectively filters out the hops into the bed and out comes the wort. And it actually doesn't go through the heat exchanger there. We've only used that once ever. These are hot liquor tanks. It actually goes over the top and through the back into this space here. And then from here, when we're doing spontaneous brewing, it actually goes back to the tap room and up to the 3rd floor. This is the mash lauder. This has got a very unique and different style of rake system. This is used so that there's less liquid in here. The rakes are much more robust. The engine is stronger to be able to mix the grain and the bed so that we actually can take out all the liquid. These two, this kettle, like I said, is the secondary kettle. Out of the sort of mash tun and the lauder comes some liquid in between steps. So we do multiple steps where we actually move the liquid from here to here and then move the kettle afterwards. And this is used to denature it, so we have a more complex wort at the end of the process. And nothing too fancy. This is a typical kettle, nothing too unusual. Always pretty and pristine inside. The guys are just cleaning right now, so it's actually getting cleaned as we speak. So that's it right there. These two vessels are both actually full. One has peaches and one has had apricots. I can't remember what's in this one now. Oh, one is plums and peaches. These are about 3,300 liters in size. We put about 700 to 900 kilograms of fruit, then about 2,500 liters of finished beer that we blended and will actually ferment in there. And they'll ferment for roughly around 2 months typically. So we come around this side. We've got some of our blending tanks and packaging tanks. So over here, we've got, these are packaging tanks. So when we're actually bottling, we fill these, they're 2,500 liters, so we can use that for bottling. There's usually one of those per day when we bottle. And then these two big tanks here are blending tanks. So when we do everything via blends, so we take multiple barrels and blend them together. These have 5,000 liters or 550 hectoliters. So you can use up to 8 barrels, maybe 9 barrels of the large 500 liter format barrels, puncheons, and we'll blend multiple barrels to get the blend of the beer. And then once they're sort of done melding, we'll put them into the packaging tanks and package it. So this is one of our barrel rooms. We have 4 barrel rooms in the facility. As you can see, this one's quite full. The ones on the wall are filled barrels. The ones on the floor are either in the process of being filled or going to be filled soon. And as you walked in here, you probably felt it's 15 degrees Celsius. It's quite humid, usually around 75%. That reduces evaporation for the barrels. It keeps the barrels fresh and healthy. They need to be hydrated. We have barrels, typically French oak, from all over the world. A lot from Napa, quite a few from Italy, Spain, France. So a whole range of barrels. We have brokers that bring them in for us. So this is a big range. And if you go walk down here, you'll also see some of our big Italian casks. So watch your step here. We've got a little pipe. So these are casks from Italy. These two are Chianti, and those 2 red ones there are Moscato. So again, these are like 1,300 and 1,200 liters, so very large vessels. And you know, we make beer in them that goes into our blends. Sometimes they're their own blend because they're quite a unique flavor. And that's what those are. So as I mentioned downstairs, we use aged hops. Typically in a brewery, we use, like modern brewery, use fresh hops, but we in fact use aged hops that are full cone, dried, and these ones are like 6 or 7 years old, and they actually sit in these bags for about a year, and these bags breathe and dry them out. So the idea behind this is that we actually have a very different flavor. They lose a lot of their pine and citrus notes, but they get a lot more like tea-like and more subtle. So we don't want that aggressive hoppiness in our beers, so we kind of particularly made that for that purpose. So these are all spontaneous barrels. So downstairs we looked at the M or the S, and the S is spontaneous. It means that's the beer that we do from using the air of the Edmonton area and the region here. So these are all similar as before, you know, typically French oak from all over the world, but a very good collection of high quality 500 liter puncheons. We typically use the 500 liter barrels for the spontaneous. We hit the cool ship. So the cool ship, of course, is one of the most important parts of our kit. It's used for the sort of the brews that use the local ambient air. Once we package the beer, we put a little bit of sugar in it, and the naturally occurring microbes will ferment the beer, and it'll carbonate within the bottle. And that whole process that goes through the system of re-fermentation takes about 10 months. And as you can see, we've got a very full cooler of beer. So come on this side, you'll see all of our bottles that are these are bottles that are actually conditioning. So these are the kind of bins they sit in. Each of these holds 500. This is actually a system that's designed in France for use in wine and champagne. So we use this entire similar system, the same bottles, same bins. So it makes it really easy. Then once we've labeled it, we throw it in boxes and get ready to send it out. So that's the whole thing here.
The process begins on the far side of the brewery in our mill room, where we mill the malts. That's basically crack open the husk and render the starch granules accessible. Then it comes through this auger line down into the mash tun. It gets hydrated as it comes in, and that begins our mash rest. Basically, we're allowing the mash to rest at a certain temperature, at a certain pH for a certain amount of time in order for the enzymes in the malt to take those starch granules and break them down into various sugars that are either more fermentable or less fermentable. Once that has gone on for long enough, then we begin the physical separation of the liquid phase from the physical phase, and that's called our sparge. Literally, we are like laundering the mash in a sense. We will filter out the liquid, allow it to run off into the boil kettle, and then in order to capture the residual sugars that still remain in the malts, we're going to pour more water on top of it. And that process lasts anywhere from an hour and a half to 2.5 hours. And as we're doing that, we're filling the kettle. And obviously, once the kettle is full, we begin our boil. At that point, while this is boiling, we'll begin cleaning out the mash tun, which is the part of the process that you can see Scott doing right now. And once it's clean, then we do it all again and overlap multiple brews, one sort of riding on the coattails of the other.
Yeah, so we're currently standing in the cellar here at Shitty's or Sea Change. Our fermenters range in size from 2,500 liters to 10,000 liters. Once the brew day is over, we cool the wort into these fermenters. They spend anywhere between 2 to 3 weeks, depending on the brand here. Lagers take longer than that, of course. And our cellar hands here are continually monitoring and doing other processes like dry hopping, things like that, adding fruit for our fruit beers. Yeah, most of our brands are in the cellar for 2 to 3 weeks.
Yeah, so these are our brights. They're called bright beer because the beer in there is generally clearer because it's been processed in a fermenter, comes over here, and that's where it's ready for packaging. But if we go backwards to the fermenters, this is what we call our tank farm. So this is our tank farm of fermenters. We've got some empty ones in here. These are little 25 hect fermenters. These are 50s, and these big tall ones are 100. Basically, the reason they have a cone shape on the bottom is because you throw the cool worts into the fermenter, you pitch yeast in, and you keep it at, kind of like an even temperature. Each beer is different, but it's like just a little bit below room temperature, so the yeast can do its job, eating all the sugars and creating alcohol and CO2. And then the reason that they're cone shaped is when you want the fermenting to stop, you cool the tank down, and then it all drops out of suspension. And the reason that the cone shape is so you can bring out the yeast, because it all sinks to the bottom, and then you can slough it out. But we now don't really have to worry about that because we have a centrifuge, and the centrifuge is basically just does that at amazing speed. So this is our canning line. This is our second canning line we've ever bought. I wasn't around for this, but the first time we got a canning line, I think it did about a flat every 5 minutes. And I think they announced that they were doing their own cans. So people were lining out the door, but they couldn't keep up to the demand. So they were basically canning as ordered, which was pretty funny. So I think they did that once or twice. And they were like, we need something faster. So this is the line we got. This is a 40 can a minute wild goose filler. It can be operated by 2 operators. Yeah, we got our decal over here. We got the coater that puts a coat on the bottom of the can. We have a twist rinse that turns the cans upside down. They get rinsed out, and then we'll go around to the other side where the filler is. And right now we're doing Fairy. On any given day, we can do about 100 hect tank, which is these 2 big ones here. And if you, so I like, they're 100 hex, and a hectoliter, is a hectoliter. Hectoliter is 100 liters. And so when I say 100 hex, sometimes people don't really grasp like what that is. So when I kind of put it this way, if you and some buddies had 8 beers a week, let's say you drank 1 beer a day and 2 on Saturday. You and 2 buddies did that, like, to get rid of one of these tanks, it would take you 16 years to get rid of one of these tanks with just drinking a flat a week. So it's quite a lot of beer. And we'll do one of these tanks in a day on this machine here. all into cans. So we'll sneak around to the other side now. I was gonna get this going to film it. So yeah, they come in, they get blasted with CO2 down here. It fills the can with CO2, or like from the bottom up, so that it's not filling just into air, because air is like the killer of beer. And then these guys, they go down, they fill, they open up at the bottom, they start filling from the bottom up, and they continue filling even as they're coming out, so that when the tube comes out, it's not just replaced by air. Then they come under here, this little CO2 hood, make sure that nothing's gonna get into the can, lids drop on, then they go through what's called double seam process. So one operation, it turns the can and lid from this to this, and then the second one just squishes those two down. So, and that's how you get a nice airtight can. And yeah, we're running at about 34 cans a minute right now.
So we kind of focus more on darker styles of beer. We wanted something that kind of set us apart from other breweries. So we kind of started off with the darker stuff. Some of our more popular beers would be our blueberry session ale. So that's a darker wheat ale. And we added some blueberry to it. It's a nice flavor and aroma. It's really popular. It's probably our most popular beer. Then we have our Irish red ale. So it's not too dark, but it's kind of on that verge. So it's a real nice, easy, malty, forward beer. Very little hops. It's nice and clean, easy drinking. Then we do have some pale ales as well, and some stouts. So our spilt milk stout is probably our flagship beer. So we serve that one on night shirt here in the tap room, so it gives it a more creamier mouthfeel. But we add a little bit of lactose sugar to it, so it gives it a sweeter edge, so it's not as bitter or as roasty as you get from some of the other stouts.
Started here in October of 2024. Southbound was started by my good friend Sue Kiernan. She was the owner-operator at the Empress Ale House. And we worked together decades ago with the Black Dog, and then again at her previous business, the Empress Ale House. I was very excited to hear that Sue was opening a brewery, and I sought her out. I asked her if she might need a little help with the new place, and luckily for both of us, she brought me in. I'm happy to be here. So I've never brewed at home. Sue is never a home brewer as far as I know. I think she just had an idea that she wanted to open a new venture, and she sought out a brewer. And our brewer Cody is terrific. He makes traditional style beers, very classical styles, but he's also willing to get outside the box with things like his sparkling IPA, the Australian hopped sparkling IPA. The name Southbound comes from a Thin Lizzy song. All of our beers are named after Thin Lizzy songs. Sue grew up in Ireland, and Thin Lizzy is her favorite band of all time. Obviously, you can tell by a lot of the merch inside, the decorations inside, and the names of all the beers and the names of the brewery. So those are very close to her heart, her Irish roots. And working here has been terrific. It's fun explaining that to people who don't understand, they don't know why a beer is called a Black Rose Stout, or they don't know why the brewery is called Southbound. And it's fun to explain to them that, hey, check out the titles on these Thin Lizzy records behind me. So Happy Beer Street for Sue and for the brewery was an obvious choice. There is bit of a constellation of breweries up and down 99th Street here in Edmonton. And the breweries span from fairly large and small, some offering food, some not. And it just makes sense to move into a little bit of a community of like-minded breweries. We find a lot of our customers, especially on the weekends, are traveling either south to north, north to south, visiting all the other breweries, doing a bit of a tour, as you will, getting some fresh air in between pints, which is highly recommended. And that's one of the fun questions to ask people when they're obviously on a brewery tour. They'll come in and have a flight, and hang out for a quick few samples. And then I usually ask as a bartender, it's like, are you headed north or headed south? Where's next on Happy Beer Street for you? Some people have a very set list of where they want to go. They definitely have to check out Long Roof, or they definitely go to Ale Architect. And some people are like, which is closest? And depending on the direction you're going, got Omen there or Long Roof over there. So, well, yeah, having worked on White Avenue for decades, it's a refreshing place to be over here. I do enjoy being busy. I love customers. I love when we get a vibe going on. But it is also nice to not necessarily be right in the thick of things. Like between 104th and 105th and White Avenue. But we get a very mixed crowd here. All different ages. We have parents bringing their children in. We're family friendly, dog friendly. We have, seniors coming in. We have young folks coming in that are just, breaking into craft beer world. We have people just out for a new experience. We have a great space here at Southbound. We're more set up like a pub rather than just a simple tasting room. We do try to emphasize community as much as we can. We try to bring local music artists, DJs, whatever we can. And we're a meeting place, and that sort of third spot, that third place to be, whether, first being home, second being work, come down and have a place to be, hang out, meet like-minded people, bounce ideas off new people. The conversations I've engaged in here with regulars and newcomers has been phenomenal, and I really, really like working here for that reason.
Originally, I started in this neighborhood with the first brewery that was in this space, with Bira. I started here about 3.5, 4 years ago, just as a kind of 1 day a week thing, just make a little extra cash and, hang out in a cool, trendy spot. And that's turned into a career for me. At Bira, we did some really cool work that I was proud of. We brewed some incredible beers. Our food program was second to none, in my opinion, in the city. But just due to a lot of changes in the landscape, COVID was a huge one. Over time, we just found it wasn't working. And while I'm really proud of the work we did with Bira, I'm super excited to be here with Campio. Campio, I think, ideologically aligns with a lot of what Bira did and what made it really cool. It's very inclusive, it's super local. You want to work with not just the community as a whole, but with community partners to improve and just give people generally what they want. A huge thing to me with beer and food and anything like that is just that sense of community and belonging that you get when you sit down for a beer at the end of a hard day or a good day, or you're just there with friends having a good time. You're able to watch a hockey game, you're able just to hang out on a gorgeous patio and enjoy some sun, and there's that little bit of like a sacredness of breaking bread, whether it's in liquid form or solid. So yeah, Campio I find is like a really good spiritual successor to this space. We're really, really invested in moving into local areas and just listening to what locals want to do. And if that means brewing certain things, then yeah, let's brew some cool stuff. If that means tailoring the menu a little bit more, let's do that too. Like, we're really, really lucky that Bira left some cool kitchen equipment, and now our chefs really get to flex some of their muscles and We have a whole section of our menu for specialties that kind of let that legacy live on of some elevated food in a craft brewery scene. Yeah, so we're still going to be fully brewing on site here. So we have a few less taps than we do at our downtown location, but that doesn't mean that we're losing out on anything. That just means we get to tailor things a little bit more specifically to this neighborhood. As well, we get to brew things specifically for this neighborhood. If people are telling us that we want a particular style of beer, we're definitely going to talk to our brewers and look at maybe making some of those. A great thing too with the whole Beer Street setup is that it just allows for that spirit of collaboration. You can go work with another brewery and do something cool. You can work with a local supplier and do something cool. Like our Alberta sours, we're using a whole bunch of just like local berries and things like that in order to make a beer that really showcases just Alberta. And at its heart, I find that's what Campio really stands for, is finding that local niche that people are looking for and just delivering it in the best way possible. And Ritchie is just such a cool community on its own. There's people from all walks of life. You have people who've been living here for their entire lives, 30, 40, 50 plus years. You have young families, like your proximity to the Mill Creek Ravine, plus again, being so close to Beer Street, like you just get this really, really neat mix of just the coolest people that come from all walks of life, all creed, religion, anything, and it's just an accepting space. Like, I feel like anyone can be whoever they want to be in Ritchie, and us moving into this community and being able to serve anyone who comes in our door is just a fantastic opportunity that just makes me very excited. Yeah, so as for the space itself, we were left a lot of really cool equipment. Like I was saying a little bit before, we're going to be brewing on site with a lot of that top-notch German brewing equipment. But yeah, we're trying to keep the room, we're trying to make it our own. Even we know that anyone who walks in who has been to beer before is still gonna be able to reminisce and take a look around, but we want to put our stamp on that place. One big change that we're doing is we've embraced a lot of hockey and things like that. So we have TVs. If you want to come down and watch a game, we have some awesome specials on game nights too. We even have TVs outside in our patio. Our patio is covered and heated and 100% dog friendly for the entire space. Yeah, we want whoever wants to come down to come in and feel at home, feel like they're welcome, because you are. So yeah, we're really excited to be moving south of the river. Ritchie, like I said, is a very, very cool community that I feel very privileged to be welcomed into as a member here. But the whole Beer Street, it's super exciting. You have this area that just kind of looks all industrial and just kind of off a little bit from White Ave, but you have 10 craft breweries who are doing super cool things, everyone carving out their own niches, everyone wanting to work together and throw events and whatnot. Everyone in this industry is passionate about beer, and the really cool thing is that just because you're passionate and you're in the same industry doesn't mean you have to be adversarial. You can work together, you can foster community, and as a whole, we think that being able to move into the space, especially being so close to Beer Street, it gives us an avenue to work with other breweries, plan events, do charity work, charity brews even, with partners that we might not have approached otherwise, just being downtown. This gets us a way to really get back to the community specifically, in this local area, and again, just keep doing really, really cool work with a bunch of other people who decided they want to do the same thing. Collaboration makes everybody better.